What's up guys, Asian here again with another Trials guide video. Today we're going to be discussing the Assembly General, the final boss of Halls of Fabrication. This is our strategies to use on Vet that Mayflower and Hellfire Dominion both use. Now this particular fight is a hard mode fight, however the difference between hard mode and non-hard mode for the Assembly General isn't that big. It's basically the Assembly General has more health, there's more adds, the adds get harder, and that's pretty much it. This particular strategy does work for both hard mode and non-hard mode Assembly General. This is going to be from the tank perspective, so I will try my best to kind of explain what's going on from the DPS and healer perspective as well, and kind of explain the mechanics of the fight, what's going on during the fight, and what everybody is doing. So the first thing that you're going to want to do before you start the fight at all is to figure out what sort of strategies that you want to use. So there's basically three different strategies that people go for, and two of them are basically variations of one strategy. So the first strategy is basically everybody is in the trench. So this area right here where the Assembly General is in, that's what we call the trench. Some people call this the corridor, the hallway, whatever you want to call it, as long as people know whatever you mean. Say it means you're in here. So one strategy, and this is more for score runs and speed runs, is that all the DPS except for one ranged DPS is in here. And then one tank is on the right platform, and then one ranged DPS is on the left platform here. This is not the strategy that we typically go with Hellfire and Mayflower, just because we prefer safer strategies. The everybody in the center strategy is a little bit more risky. The other strategy, which has two variations, is basically melee or ranged DPS are in the trench, and then the whichever group is not chosen to be in the trench is up here on the right hand side with one of the tanks. You still have one ranged DPS here on the left hand side though. So particularly for Mayflower and Hellfire, we typically do melee is in the trench here, and then ranged is up here. That's typically how we go about it, but you can go the other way around. You can go melee up here and then range down here if you would like. Basically the only difference there is going to be positioning. So right now you can kind of see a couple of good positions right here. So right here where Mayo is right now, this is kind of the cutoff point for the left arm. So the left arm is the blade arm, and you do want a person on each side here in order to draw aggro from the Assembly General's two arms. You don't have to do anything, you just have to stand here. So Mayo is going to be the one that taunts, quote unquote, the left hand here, the blade hand. And so basically what he's going to do is he's going to run here until the blade hand starts spinning, and then he's going to run back here so it won't hit him. And then kind of the same thing here. I'm the tank, so I can kind of just live through the fire hand, but if I wanted to, I could just taunt the fire hand, just kind of get it to attack me, and then run back over here, so I'm not getting hit at all. Now, where Riffle is standing, right along this corner here, this is actually safe from the fire. So if I get the fire and it's shooting back and forth over here, as long as the ranged DPS and the healer are standing back here, they're perfectly safe. They won't get hit by the fire. Basically, this kind of corner here, this line corner, is kind of the safe zone. Anywhere past here, you're not going to get hit by the fire hand. It's kind of the same thing over here. Once you're past this corner, it's safe from the blade arm here. And that's important because if we don't have aggro on these two arms, they're actually going to attack everybody down here. So we're doing melee in the trench, so they're going to be standing right up against the boss here on the right foot. So we actually don't want them to get cut down by the two hands here. So that's kind of the strategy that we use there. If your melee is up top over here, obviously they won't be able to stand here and hit the boss. Instead, they'll be kind of standing over here along the side of the boss. Just close enough, just inching up a little bit, up like right around here-ish, so that way they're able to hit the boss without falling off. So I don't personally recommend doing that because you run the risk of melee, one or two melee potentially falling off, trying to find their positions, dodge rolling, whatever. It's much safer to have the melee down here than the range over here, so that way you don't have to worry about the range dying at all, and because over here you're still taking damage from the fire hand, so it's going to be a little bit more work on the top right healer here if you have a range up here. And there's generally less damage coming from the trench than there is up here on the fire hand. So that's my personal preference: melee in the trench, ranged up on the right hand side next to the flame harm. Now, so that's basically the two top sides. There's not much you really have to worry about up until obviously the arms fall off, but we'll discuss that a little bit later. For the people in the trench, that would be a tank and a healer, and then in our case, all the melee DPS. So the tank is obviously going to be taunting him and just kind of maintaining taunt. The melee DPS will just be hitting him. And the healer, depending on where the healer wants to go, he can either be kind of back here, over here. Basically, if you see this little pipe here, if you can stand either with the melee stack or you can stand behind this pipe. It's up to you. So in the trench, there's basically two moves you want to watch out for. So the first one is his or his left foot, but our right foot. The right foot will stomp down, and that'll deal damage and knock you back if you are basically in front of this pipe here. The second thing is he will basically stomp with his foot again, and if you remember the traps from the previous boss, the reactor and the Fabrication committee, it's basically the same thing. He'll basically shoot out 4 or 5 little lightning lines that will eventually make the traps spawn, the bad touches, the grabby hands, and you just have to kite around those. They'll just kind of be anywhere really back here. It's kind of where they are at. And then the main tank, the one thing you have to watch out for is going to be his sucker punch. So basically what he does is he uppercuts you, and you will launch you straight back wherever your back is lined up against. So for example, if you're angled this way, so your back is towards the wall, he'll punch you into the wall, and when you hit the wall, you'll actually die, because you just got smacked into the wall, basically. So what you want to do is you want to make sure your back is always lined up to the center, perfectly in line with the center. So don't try to block, because it's not actually lined up correctly, like it's not a 180-degree line when you raise your shield. Use your back instead to kind of line up it correctly. And so when he punches you, you will get thrown back, and if you're not right underneath his feet, basically, he'll do 3 jumps, 1 jump at a time, and on the 3rd jump, it's basically a group wipe. So what a lot of main tanks do, well, they'll have a charge ability, so that way when they get knocked back, they can just charge right back in, so that way you avoid that first jump, because the first jump will knock everybody down, and it will stun you as well, and it's not something you can block, it's just something that happens, it's scripted. So that is basically all the mechanics for this fight, so we're going to go ahead and start the video here. And so this is what we call the trench phase, or the main phase, corner phase. There's a bunch of different terminologies that I've heard. I like to go with trench phase, but that's kind of up to you and your own group what you want to do here. So you can see here, this is kind of what's happening here. We have aggro on all the hands. You can't really see it, but Mayo is actually out there. So you can see he's going in close, getting aggro from the blade hand, then he backs away so it doesn't get damaged here. I can just stand right here because I'm a tank. The flame doesn't hit me as bad. You can see melee down here. That's the right stomp. You just want to block it. So when he does his stomp, you can block it, and that will actually prevent you from being knocked back. You still take damage, but you won't be knocked back anymore. Now, there are a couple of percentage points that you want to be mindful of. So the first one is going to be at 90%. And then from there on out, it's going to be 75%, or I should say 70%, 50%, and 30%. So at this point here, 90, 70, 50, 30, the blade hand, you can see here, disappears. It's destroyed. And you will see here that basically little shock things will spawn and basically rain down on that platform here. Now after this hand has despawned, you will see these 2 adds spawn. These 2 adds will spawn every time a hand gets destroyed. So if the flame hand gets destroyed next, 2 more adds will spawn. So it's the job of the tank on this platform here to taunt the calefactor that spawns over here on the left platform, and then the capacitor that spawns here on the right platform. And basically hold on to them up until the next hand falls off. So keep on going ahead. You can see here you range taunt it, and you can taunt the capacitor. Melee group will continue to DPS. Range group will start dealing with the adds and taking down the adds. Then the second hand falls off at 87%, 67%, 47%, and 27%. So it's basically the 0s and the 7s. And that's when the flame hand falls off, and basically the exact same thing happens here. So you can see here little shock balls come out, and you'll have 2 adds that spawn, calefactor and capacitor. At this point, everybody stops DPS. Main tank just has to deal with the Assembly General on his own. Assembly General doesn't deal that much damage, so it's not that bad. And then what you're going to do, the tank is basically going to hide in this little corner right here, and that will bring the capacitors right over here, and then you can just bring the calefactors, stack them on top of the capacitors, and then DPS the adds down. Once all the adds are dead, that's when you can start bringing everybody can go back into the trench. There is a kind of a bug right now where if you go back while the calefactor is not on this side, if you go back too quickly, basically, the calefactor will actually reset. So that's something you just want to keep in mind here. And again, you do want to make sure all the adds are dead before you move on to the next phase. So you can see here I'm waiting to make sure that the calefactor is on this platform first before I move him back.
Oh shit.
So after we kill this calefactor, everybody's going to go into the trench, and you're basically going to DPS him down to the first threshold, which is going to be 85%. The next thresholds are going to be 65%, 45%, 50, 25%. You can kind of see a pattern growing here. So you can see here everybody jumps down, and we continue DPSing the boss up to that 85% threshold. And then you're going to be splitting up into two groups here. So you're going to have a tank and healer in each group, and then 4 DPS. It can be really any DPS here, and you're going to basically form a formation. So the first thing you want to know is, obviously all this pink is bad, don't want to stand here, so you have to stand within this little channel right here. See, I throw down circle of protection here, and you can kind of see the makings of our little formation here. So let's go ahead and move ahead. So tank and healer are basically going to stack right over here where the cross is, a little bit off center here. You will have little rockets raining down on you, and then the melee DPS are basically going to go as far as you can up until the very edge of the circle of protection, and then the ranged DPS are going to be standing as far back as they can up until the edge of the circle of protection. So you typically have 4 stam, 4 ranged DPS. You split up 2 and 2, so 2 range, 2 melee. So melee here, range here. If you're doing something different, then you just have to obviously split yourself up accordingly. Healer is basically going to be just doing healing springs the whole time, maybe some orbs here and there. Don't really need to use combat prayer. The idea here is to stay alive and then kill the terminal. Doesn't matter if you die, as long as you kill the terminal, it's not going to be a group wipe. So yeah, let's say one of us dies, don't bother rezzing, just kill the terminal first, and then you can res somebody if you'd like. So the idea here is basically the way we're standing, we won't end up overlapping our red circles, but we'll still get the minor protection from circle of protection here. Doesn't really matter too much if tank and healer get hit, just because they have heals and tank have better resistances. So during this phase, Assembly General is in the center here. He's invulnerable. If you basically attack him, he'll reflect that damage back to you. So pets, it's very important to control your pets to make sure they're not attacking the Assembly General, so that way you don't die. And he just stands there. What we do is called right center right set strategy. So one group will always stay where the Assembly General is at, so where he was. So that group will stay there. The second group will run, if you run towards the center, if you basically turn around and run towards the center, you first go on this first split here to the right, and then you go right down the center, and then you go to the right again, and I'll show you guys what I mean when we go over each of those different phases here. At the end of this phase, he will stand up, and you will see basically get hit by some shock damage. So there's the shock damage right there. It does more damage the more terminals are alive, so just killing the 2 is enough to make sure everybody survives that, assuming they have close to full health. And then you basically repeat this fight all over again. Now, starting at this phase here, you will start to get what are called Fascimiles. So every once in a while, the Assembly General will scan somebody and basically create a facsimile of them. And that's basically going to be a ad that is the same class of whoever he just scanned. So we'll just wait for one to spawn here. Alright, and then when those facsimiles spawn, there's basically 2 strategies you can deal with when it comes to dealing with the facsimiles. Either the main tank can tank them right down there and they die to cleave, or the off tank up on the right platform can take them, and then the ranged DPS will DPS those down. So that's kind of the 2 strategies that you can use. We go with the off tank tanks them up, and the ranged DPS kind of range them down, cleave them down. We're just gonna wait until we see one of them spawn. You can see here that he jumps just because we didn't have the tank up there. So that's the first facsimile that spawns.
Stick with it this time, Ned, but next.
The other thing that could also happen, and this will happen from time to time, is that whenever somebody dies, a facsimile will automatically spawn. It's not going to be of the person who died necessarily, but it will just be a facsimile that spawns. There is a cooldown to that as well. So, for example, if 6 people go down, you won't get 6 facsimiles. You'll still only get 1, but it's on a separate cooldown from the standard spawn of the facsimile. So you can see here that the main tank went down, so the off tank has to jump down here, take taunts, that way we don't wipe to the jump mechanic.
Time, let someone else res.
Sure.
Then when the main tank is back up, the main tank can basically take the boss back, and then the off tank can go jump back up to the top there. So you can see here, I'm just going to take the Facsimile with me.
Back up top.
And remember that the health thresholds here are going to be 70,
Second arm's down,
67,
go to the trench.
and then it will move into the center at 65%. You can see here, because I was down, I had to kind of go over and taunt all the Facsimiles that spawned while I was running back up to the top here.
Get too many ads.
And remember that whenever people die, a Facsimile will spawn, so you want to make sure you're not dying too often here. You can see here we have a Nova down. Some groups like to put down Nova if there are a lot of ads up. It's really helpful if your DPS is on kind of on the lower end, your group DPS is on the lower end here. And then you just want to make sure everybody's alive before you move on to the next phase. So you still want to make sure all the ads are dead before you move on. And one thing to keep in mind is that you might have a Facsimile that spawns, like right here, when the last ad dies. So you just want to be a little bit aware. Hold off for maybe a second or two just to make sure that the Facsimile doesn't spawn right away, and then jump down to the center. If you jump down to the center and a Facsimile spawns, everybody should turn around and focus down the Facsimile before you DPS the boss down to the next threshold.
Okay. We're gonna. Okay, you did it.
And so he push him to 65%. So you can see here, my group goes directly across, and then the other group stays where the boss was at. And you basically do the same thing all over again. You kill the terminals. Make sure you kill the terminal before you res anybody.
Take a step forward.
And that's basically the remainder of the fight here. So you do this all over again up until the 45%, and then you do it once more up until you get up to execute, and then we'll talk about execute in a little bit here. So moving on ahead here, we'll just push ahead to the next phase here. So again, we do the exact same thing, kill all the ads, make sure to not push them up to 45% until all the ads are dead. Then this is the last terminal phase here, so nothing changes at all. You still have to deal with the Facsimiles, you still have to deal with the stomps, you have to deal with pretty much everything that you would normally deal with already. Moving on ahead. Alright, so this is going into execute phase now. So execute starts at 25%. So once you hit the 25% mark, you're in execute phase, you don't have to do terminal phase. At this point, you're going to go into the center. So we'll go ahead. Nope, a little bit too far here. So this is at 25%, so it's important that everybody is alive here, and then you have your set positions. So if you go ahead and take a look here, so the way Mayflower and Hellfire does it, we have the 8 positions stack here. So you have 2 DPS on each of these rails here, DPS on the boss, and you have tank, or rather tank, healer. So the healers are across from each other on the corners, and tanks are across from each other on the corners as well. Tanks are throwing down circle of protections to help protect the DPS, and then healers are just using healing springs as well as Novas. Some groups put down Novas at certain health percentages. So for example, us, I think we do it at 10% and then 5%, and then I use Warhorn in the beginning, and then the other tank uses Warhorn at I think 15% or something like that. So that's kind of a strategy that a lot of people like to use. So for execute phase, he just stands here. He's not invulnerable anymore. You basically have to DPS him down. So he has 27 million health still starting at execute. And he basically does damage to everybody. And it's the exact same damage that happens during terminal phase. So it is an AoE, which is why you kind of want to make sure you're separated enough so the AoEs don't overlap each other. And you kind of see where I'm positioned as a tank, and that's kind of where you want to stand if you're a tank or a healer. And then a DPS, you're going to be standing here. So if you move on ahead here, well, you'll be able to see the exact positioning here. So you throw down circle of protection, then you back up here. So you can see the DPS are basically right up at the very end of the tracks here, and then the tanks are basically throw down. You move forward, you throw down your circle of protection so it hits the DPS. You can see here they're both getting hit by circle of protection. Then you back up so that way your circle doesn't end up overlapping on them, so you're not damaging them by accident there. Healers are just throwing out orbs, healing springs, combat prayers if you can have them down. Then you're just DPSing the boss all the way through to the end until he's dead or you guys are dead. So for this execute phase, there's something called exhaustion. I believe we do hit exhaustion here. So exhaustion happens so the first 60 seconds of execute, there's no exhaustion, so you just take normal damage. The next 15 seconds after that is going to be exhaustion stage 1, and then 15 seconds after that one is going to be exhaustion stage 2, and then exhaustion stage 3, and that's the max stacks of exhaustion. So the more exhaustion stacks you have, the more damage you're going to take from the rockets that go down. So there is a DPS check. A lot of groups won't be able to survive exhaustion stage 2. Very, very, very few groups are able to survive exhaustion stage 3. So you want to make sure to meet the DPS check. Typically speaking, if you're going into exhaustion stage 2, like for a few seconds, then you're going to be looking at around 35k single target DPS with raid buffs and everything like that, obviously. If you want to get into exhaustion stage 1, but not exhaustion stage 2, then the DPS check is going to be a little bit higher. I believe it's around 32 or 42 or 43k single target DPS. If you want to skip exhaustion altogether on hard mode, I believe it's like 50k DPS, something like that, 52k DPS. Obviously, this DPS threshold is lowered in non-hard mode. So non-hard mode, you lose about 5 million health on execute, so you only have to do about 21 million health instead of 27 million health like you have here. So the DPS check is a little bit lower here. So you can see here that's where the healers are at. So we're kind of back here. You can see there's this little line here, and we're just kind of like in the center there. And you can't see all the red circles just because there's a lot, but you can see mine. They're not overlapping on the DPS, and that's kind of what you want. So you just want to make sure your circle isn't overlapping on the DPS. You go in, you throw down your circle of protection, you back out, so that way you're not hitting them with that red AoE. You can see here also the healer over there. Is avoiding that. So you don't want to back up because back here, that's where the poison happens. You're safe in this section right here. This section doesn't get hit by poison at all. So you just keep DPSing him down until you get to the end here.
Next horn. Next
All right.
Nova. Block.
And now, one thing I do want to mention here is if you start taking too long in execute phase, you will start getting adds here. So you can see here we got a capacitor, you get a capacitor and a calefactor. So if that does happen to your group, just make sure one of the tanks taunt them, so that way they're not hitting the DPS there. So if you're not able to meet that DPS check, then that's what's going to end up happening there. So that's just something to keep in mind. So you will know they spawned when you see an incoming conduit strike. Normally the capacitor will open up with a conduit strike. So once you see that, you know you have adds up, and you know you have to turn around and as a tank and kind of look for them and make sure to taunt them so they don't kill your DPS. And that's basically the entire fight there. So non-hard mode is pretty much non-hard mode. Basically, you have a little bit lower health. So he has, I believe, around 86 million health at non-hard mode. Hard mode, he jumps up to 104, I believe. So that's kind of the difference between non-hard mode and hard mode. So hard mode, the only real difference is he has a lot more health and you take a little bit more damage. So it's not. The DPS check does increase by a fair amount. It's like about 8k additional on top of your DPS between hard mode and non-hard mode. So that's something just to keep in mind if you decide to do it. Hard mode is reversible, unlike in the Crowdrun trial. So if you decide hard mode's too much, you can just turn off hard mode, just do normal vet instead. So that is it for this video. If you guys have any questions at all about the mechanics, about the strategies that we use, or about Hall's Fabrication in general, please leave them down in the comment section below, and I will try to get back to them as quickly as I can. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next trial.